To all my hustlers, dreamers, love dealers, I'm that kind of girl. Work hard, play hard, for my own heart, might just rule the world. I'm on fire, can you feel the heat? You can try to, but you can't stop me.
This is Marci Burrows and Carol O'Savin hosting the Midlife Mavens podcast, where we chat candidly about sex, love, relationships, and life for women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. We're both psychologists who specialize in relationships and sexuality, but this isn't therapy. Thanks for joining us to discuss the ups and downs of life in the middle. We hope our conversations inspire and empower you.
A quick disclaimer. We're both psychologists who specialize in relationships and sexuality, but this isn't therapy. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional services from a psychologist or other qualified mental health professional. The use of any products or services purchased by you as a result of this podcast does not create a healthcare provider-patient relationship between you and any of the experts affiliated with this podcast. Let's get into today's episode.
Welcome to today's episode. Today, we're going to talk about the challenge of long-term relationships. And this is part of a series we want to do on navigating relationships. And we're thinking this will be a 3-part series. We may end up adding some more down the road, but we want to talk about long-term relationships and navigating them, dating and single life, and shifting relationship structures. So today, we're going to talk about the challenges of long-term relationships and kind of thinking about meeting somebody maybe in your 20s, 30s, and starting a relationship, and then maybe you have kids, maybe you don't, you have careers. And then now in this phase, looking at empty nests, possibly moving towards retirement, and how a lot of couples end up growing apart, maybe not knowing each other as well, and having some challenges that are different than maybe they were earlier in relationships.
So as Marci and I were talking about this, generating the idea for today's episode, we realized there were a lot of different things that we could talk about in this regard in terms of the challenges of long-term relationships. I think the issue that I hear most from my clients who have been in long-term relationships is the challenge of the boredom of the relationship. Even when things are changing as the relationship, the family structure changes, empty nest, retirement, job changes, all of those kinds of things. The issue that folks seem to come back to over and over again is that they are bored. I actually had somebody say to me the other day, is it wrong that I think about how much more I might enjoy my life if I was single again? And I had to say, I don't think it's wrong. I think it is reflective of things that we might need to talk about. But so I don't know, is that consistent? You see a lot more couple. I see individuals. I don't see couples at all. You see couples. Is that what you hear from them?
Well, yeah, I do see a lot of where people kind of get into a routine and can feel bored with that. I think also specializing in sex therapy, that definitely comes across in the bedroom, that people are missing that passion and maybe new relationship energy they had earlier in the relationship. But also I think just that things are so routine that you get up, go to work. If there's kids involved, you do the things you do to take care of the kids, and then it's time to go to bed and rinse, repeat. And that there's not a novelty or excitement. Maybe there's a couple of vacations a year, but other than that, it's kind of the same day-to-day sort of rut that people can get caught up in.
And that is the conversation sometimes, that it's important as relationships go on. And I think we were thinking about this as being more like longer term, right? 20, maybe even 30 years worth of a relationship. But I hear that from clients that have been in relationships for a year or two, that after that honeymoon phase of the first few months wears off. And now life is often about, we got to go to work every day and we got to pay the bills and we got to figure out who's taking care of the dogs and what are we doing, if anything, for vacation. That the routine sets in, and that contributes to that same kind of boredom to be as an issue, not just in years long relationships, but also in relationships much shorter than that.
And I think that a piece of it, and I feel like across these episodes, I kind of harp on societal expectations, but I do think there's a part of it that we're taught that's what life looks like. You find somebody, you settle down, you start your life together, you have your job or you have kids, and the focus is on that. And I remember years and years ago when my kids were younger, kind of feeling like I was on that hamster wheel, that you just jump on the
Yeah.
hamster wheel that you're expected to be on. And so it is kind of this different way of looking at life to maybe do some things different, to say maybe I'm going to prioritize things different. And
There's a book that's totally not related to this at all, but it's called Care and Feeding of the Soul. It's a myth book. But that's kind of what I think about when I talk to clients in this struggle. What are you doing? What's the care and feeding of the relationship that you're engaging in? Especially when there's kids involved and they become the priority, as they often should be. What's the care and feeding of the relationship that's happening? How are you keeping that active, keeping that fresh, keeping that alive?
absolutely. And I think that's something that, again, is a myth. Like, we see these fairy tales and, Cinderella finds Prince Charming and it's supposed to all go so smoothly and it's all easy. And I don't think people expect relationships to be hard work, that they have to be something that you have to put effort into to keep going, to keep the excitement going, that you have to prioritize, or it is going to get boring and routine, and there's going to be struggles. So then how do you continue to work on it and look for the things that you value in the relationship and how you want to show up in the relationship?
And I hear a lot of folks will talk about, well, we're going on this big adventure, we're going on this vacation, and that's something to look forward to. It'll be exciting. But most of us don't live on vacation. We are only doing that for a week or two here and there in our lives. And if that's the only new or different thing that we're doing in our relationships, it's probably not sufficient to keep the
Right.
relationship healthy and thriving in some ways.
Yeah. Oh, so Gottman, we talk about a few things that I think apply to this conversation. One of them is rituals of connection. And they look at what are the things that you do on a regular basis that keep you connected, that keep you turning towards each other. And, those can be really small things. They don't have to be, you know, having a date night every week, although that's a great idea too. But like,
Right.
it could be something small, like taking a walk. Like my partner and I, we frequently walk the dog together in the morning. And when we don't get an opportunity to do that, I miss that, because that's a time where I connect with him. But it can be things like how you say goodbye in the morning when you're leaving for the day, and how you say hello. They have a 6-second kiss that the Gottmans recommend that lead to more connection and relationship satisfaction. So that's one of the things that on a day-to-day basis that you can do to prioritize the relationship and keep that connection going. They also talk about like moving towards moves, like away and towards moves. And so those could be if your partner is making a attempt to connect with you, whether it's a ritual of connection or just even, saying, hey, this is something that's interesting to me. We're so caught up frequently in things like social media, our phones, that we don't usually pay attention. Sometimes we can just be not even aware they're talking to us. So I always tell this to my clients, if your partner says, oh, it's a beautiful day out, and you're looking down at your phone and not saying anything, that's rejecting a bid for connection. You don't even realize that they're trying to connect with you. But even a small thing like saying, oh yeah, it is enough to to not feel like that rejection. Or, even better would be to say, hey, yeah, it's gorgeous. Let's go take a walk. But even just, yeah, it is a really pretty day out, is remaining connected and letting them know that you're interested in hearing them. And it's easy to forget to do those little things. So,
It can be, I think, especially when you're in busy, and as we get older, right? You and I are both over 50, and the people that we're talking to in this podcast we're imagining are 40s and above. And job expansion, job promotion, job responsibilities often grow as we get older. And then it can be easy, I think, to get caught up in, I'm so busy all the time. There's so much stress from my job and from the kids and from our aging parents, that we don't ever really make direct eye contact with our partners. And
mhm.
often that's because, like you were saying, we've got our phones and we're paying more attention to our phones. So I encourage clients, and this is a rule in my own household, we can't always just not have our phones with us because of circumstances, but we try not to get caught up in our phones during dinner. We try to have dinner together, even if we're not eating the same thing. We're at least having a conversation about life. How was your day? What's new with in your world? Did you talk to your mom today? Did you talk to your sister? Those kinds of things. So there are those opportunities to connect, and it's so easy. For me, I'll just speak for myself. It's easy at the end of a long day to just want to withdraw and go back into myself and not have to think about connecting with others, reaching out, being curious about their lives. And personally, I think that is can be the beginning of the end of a relationship if that doesn't get corrected, because it starts to look like you don't care about me. You don't care what's
Right.
happening in my life. And we're already so separate. You're off working your job all day, and I'm off working my job all day. If we're not coming together at some point, that's a problem. So
Yeah.
finding
Yeah.
a way
And,
to do
and I,
that daily, I think, is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the questions that you brought in there, because I think those are the things that do keep you knowing each other. And another Gottman concept is the one of love maps, which is that how well do you continue to know your partner? Early on in a relationship, we usually have natural interest and curiosity. You're just getting to know this person. And then we make these assumptions later on. Oh, I know them. I don't need to keep asking this stuff. But our lives change and our interests change, and what happens day to day changes. And so having those conversations where you say, hey, what did you do today? What was the good thing that happened today? How can I support you in things that are going on in your world? Who did you have lunch with? Who do you hang out with at work? Just finding out what your person's life looks like can really keep that connection going and keep you learning each other, and even finding out new exciting things that you may not have been aware that is happening in your partner's life, that keeps some of that interest and novelty and excitement going.
One of the conversations I hear myself having with clients a lot, different clients over and over, is I think this is pretty common. And maybe it starts in the honeymoon phase, the early stages of the relationship. And we're so in love and we're so excited to be together and we're so curious about each other that we get kind of insular. And especially if we're not doing a good job talking about what's happening outside of our lives, and if we're always doing things together, we always go to the grocery store together, we always go out on dates together, we always do social things together, there's not enough outside influence. I worry that becomes a situation where there's not enough outside influence to bring up questions in the world. One of
Mhm.
the things that I've really appreciated about my wife is she, long before I met her, she was in a book club that the neighborhood women formed before I lived in this neighborhood. And we're both avid readers, but she never asked me to be a part of this book club. And I'm really glad she didn't, because I wouldn't want to do it, because I really like that we have separate things. She goes to her book club and she's reading books for her book club that then she can tell me about. And she can tell me about things that they're talking about at the book club. And I do a different kind of a book club with other people that she doesn't know, and I can tell her about that. And it's those kinds of things. Having separate lives that we come together with, I think, is really helpful as in part of keeping the relationship interesting, honestly.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that you can really end up on both ends of the extreme, either so disconnected you don't do anything together, or too enmeshed where there's not really anything to talk about because you're there all the time and you don't have lives separate from each other. And either way can lead to an imbalance.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that just popped into my head is we don't talk about this very well. I guess that's why we're doing this podcast, right? But do couples talk about this, or do they just get so caught up in getting the kids to their next activity or paying the bills or feeding the dogs that they don't have conversations about what they want their lives to look like?
Yeah, and I think, I have a skewed population that I see because they're coming to couples therapy, so there's an issue, but I do see a lot where they don't communicate and talk, and then there's interpretations that are made about it that, well, he doesn't love me, or she doesn't love me anymore, or they're not attracted to me anymore, and instead of communicating about it and trying to figure out what's going on, we kind of make up in our heads what's going on. And then that becomes even more divisive as we really kind of hold on tightly to the theories, the hypotheses that we're making up or assuming.
That's probably a whole nother episode that we should do on communication, especially as we age and we fill in the blanks often around what's happening around us by what our own experiences have been.
Yeah.
We wanted to just briefly interrupt the episode today to make sure that you all have our contact information. If any of the content that we've talked about in any of our episodes brings up issues that you would like to explore with a psychologist, we want to remind you that Marci and I are both psychologists and would be happy to consider working with you if it seemed like it would be helpful. So, a quick blurb about each of our practices.
So my practice focuses mainly on work with couples and individuals around issues related to relationships and intimacy. I'm an ASEC certified sex therapist and work with things like communication skills, life transitions within couples, issues related to intimacy, mismatched libidos, any type of sexual problems in the relationship. I work with issues related to trauma and how that impacts relationships. And I practice from a neurodivergent affirming lens.
And this is Carol. And I would describe my practice as one directed exclusively toward individuals who feel like they are struggling to change some long-standing patterns in their lives. So you might think of those as core issues that have been present in their lives for a long time that are no longer serving them in the way that they did previously. So I can help individuals figure out what those core issues are, figure out ways of dealing with them a little bit differently so that they don't encounter the same kind of obstacles in their lives.
I also work with a lot of individuals who identify as LGBTQ and with women who are encountering difficulty in their relationships with their moms as they age, or older moms who are having difficult relationships with their adult daughters.
If you're interested in working with either one of us, we both offer 15-minute consultations to assess if it seems like we'd be a good fit for your therapeutic needs. You can go to my website, which is Marci, M-A-R-C-I, Burroughs, B-U-R-R-O-U-G-H-S, PhD-CST.com, or Carol's website, which is drosabin.com, DROSABEN.com. We also have our websites in the YouTube channel notes for this episode. And now back to our episode. Other things that we haven't even talked about that we had written down about today are things like you have changes in your mental health over time, or even changes in health over time too, and how that impacts the relationship, differences in ability. Maybe one partner is physically able to go do more and another one isn't as healthy for whatever reasons and can't be as active, and how that impacts the relationship.
When my wife and I first met, we were often doing things. We are part of a hot air balloon team. That's a very active, adventurous sport. And we met hiking in the forest with our animals. So we like to do those kinds of things. Not long after I met her, my hips started to deteriorate, and I ended up having both of my hips replaced in 2019. And I didn't realize until I had had my hips replaced and I was starting the healing and recovery process at how much I had had to withdraw from those kinds of activities. Or I had to take so many pain relieving medications that those had a whole different impact on how I was feeling. I distinctly remember snowshoeing with our animals, with our dogs. That's one of the activities that we love to do in northern Arizona. And I didn't get to go for the last couple of years because snowshoeing is really a hard workout, especially when the snow is deep. And when you have bad hips, that's not something that you want to spend your time doing. I didn't want to spend my time doing. So you're right. Changes in health or mental health over time really can change how you're connecting with your partner. And you have to be able to pay attention to that and talk about that and be supportive with each other as you get in shape or stay in shape or start to shift what your priorities are in terms of working out or diet, those kinds of things. And those need to be important conversations.
Yeah. And I think with mental health, when women start going through perimenopause, there oftentimes is a big shift in mental health and emotions, increase in anxiety, increase in depression, and being able to communicate about that and educate yourself, educate your partner about what's going on with you, what's going on with your body. That could be a huge change in a long-term relationship,
Yeah.
that all of a sudden, in some ways, you're different in how you're showing up than you were before.
And back again to the reason we're doing this podcast, because those things don't get talked about.
Right.
There's not a lot of places in the world where people talk about how have my thoughts and feelings about my body, about what my body can do, about what I'm interested in doing with other people changed as I hit perimenopause, menopause. I mean, the reality is that those experiences change how our hormones are being delivered, and changes in our hormones change how we show up, how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about other people, our comfort level in engaging in sex and sexual activity. And if we're not talking about that stuff, if we're not curious with each other about what's going on, again, we start to make assumptions about why things are different, and that can lead to it's like this whole cascade of problems that gets formed.
Yeah.
And then same, right? Communication. I keep coming back to communication as we get ready to move toward retirement or empty nest. You know more about that than I do, but when life circumstances change, right? Maybe we're not working anymore. Maybe we're not raising kids anymore because they're out of the house or not as actively. I don't know if you ever stop raising kids, but you're at least not as, then that changes how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about our world and our energy level and what we're interested in. And those things have such profound impact on our lives that talking about how we want to move through those experiences becomes really important. What do you want life to look like in retirement? What do you want life to look like when we are in emptiness? Do we want to move? Do we want to downsize? Do we want to change jobs? Even job change and promotion can have those same kinds of impacts and
Huge.
require.
Yeah. I remember when I left the counseling center, I went through a pretty significant dip in mood for a while because it was such a big part of my identity. And it was my choice to leave. I wanted to spend more time with my kids, but I didn't realize how difficult that loss of that part of myself would be. And I think that's very similar to how I felt when my eldest left for school the first time and moved out. And, that was another place where I thought I just wasn't aware at how much that was a big part of my identity in my day-to-day life, and having to figure out who I was and how I was going to relate to her and to my partner at the time. And it's a lot of changes to navigate.
And again, if we're not paying attention to them, and so many of us don't, we sort of go through our lives so caught up in the news or our phones or our jobs or finances or whatever might be going on, that if we're not attending to how that's impacting our relationships, it can have a real negative impact almost before we realize it. And then things start to happen. And I don't know what your caseload is like in this regard, Marci, but I have seen not a few women, because they have found themselves looking outside their relationship, their long-term relationships, for getting needs met that aren't getting met in their primary relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Not always because the other person isn't interested in meeting the needs, but because they're not talking about how their needs have shifted and what needs to shift in the relationship. And that goes back to what you were saying about what we're telling ourselves about why that is. Why can't I talk to my partner about this issue? Because they're going to judge me, or they're going to think something that I don't want them to think. And that becomes a really slippery slope.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It becomes a whole lot of disconnection.
I think one of the things that I hear myself saying to clients in these kinds of circumstances, especially when it's been a long time since we met our person, it can be easy in the hustle and bustle and hecticness of having a life and a family. It can be easy to forget what it was that attracted us to this person in the first place, way back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that we can remember that and look for those pieces of our partner, the more our source of connection can become present for us, instead of disappearing under all of the hecticness of our life.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's actually one of my questions I ask during my couples intakes is, how did you meet and what was it that attracted you to each other? Because that piece is important for them to remember and to voice. I also like to assign my clients to spend some time just watching their partner, because that's something we don't do a whole lot of. But like, spend a little time when they don't know you're doing it and just watch them play with the dog, watch them interact with your kids, watch them even as they're sitting there doing a hobby, and just see what you notice. And it's rare that people will take the time to do that. And that sometimes reconnects them with what was initially there, or something new that they find interesting and attractive, that because they were so busy either on their phones, with their job, with the kids, or in their head, like worrying about something or thinking about everything else they're managing, that they haven't really seen their partner in a while.
That just reminded me, there are times where in a conversation, I'll learn something about my wife that, even though we've been together 11 or 12 years, somehow I didn't know it already. And I think I fall into this trap of thinking I know everything about her. And that's nearly maybe it is impossible, but I'll say nearly impossible to know any single other person in your world. And I love that. There is something, I'm always sort of amazed. How did I not know that about you?
Mhm.
After all these years, how did I not know? I think that's the thing that I like to try to do, is find something about your partner that you don't already know.
Yeah,
Learn that
that's
about
awesome.
them.
Love
I
that.
think there's always something that we can learn about the other people in our life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love when my partner surprises me when he reacts in a way that's different than I expected. And I can just like sit back and think, wow, that's not what I thought. And that's awesome. That it's not where my assumption was, where I expected you to go with that.
So, obviously, as evidenced by how many times we said communication and connection and those kinds of things, there are some themes that run through relationships that you'll probably hear us talk about again as we start talking about what dating and single life is like in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, and then what kind of shifting relationship structures. So look for those in future episodes, probably come back to those common themes a lot, but some things to think about if you find yourself in one of those long-term relationships and feel like things might be getting a little stale. Hopefully we've given you some things to reflect on today that you could think about shifting and move forward in a different direction.
See you next episode.
Great. Thanks for being here. This has been Marci Burrows and Carol O'Sabin with the Midlife Mavens podcast. As psychologists, we are big advocates for therapy. If anything in today's conversation left you feeling like there is more that you would like to explore, we encourage you to pursue therapy. In today's episode notes, we've listed links for several directories you could use to find a therapist who's a good fit for you. Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you in a future episode. Be sure to visit our Midlife Mavens Facebook page to share your ideas about future conversations.